Hello and welcome to Racing News 365 answers your fan questions from last weekend's British Grand Prix. I, Nick Golding, cannot answer your questions alone, so joining me to go through a brilliant range of questions from yourselves is none other than the awesome duo that is 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Absolutely Peace Coop, and the man, the myth, the almighty legend, that is none other than lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, before we get in to what are some brilliant questions, so thank you once again to the fans that sent in questions. We randomly picked 5, but there were so many that we had to randomly choose from. So thank you very, very much to everyone who sent your questions in. Please do keep those coming after each Grand Prix. Ian, I'll come to you first because before we get into those questions, Silverstone. Every single year it throws up something. Can we have 24 of these?
Throughout the calendar, I know. I think by the time if we did have 24, us as journalists, and I'm referring to everybody that covers the sport, we'd probably be on our feet by the end of the season. I mean, we already are anyway when it comes to 24 Grand Prix, but if every Grand Prix is like that, there'd be nothing left of us. We'd be destroyed by the end of the season, covering all that content. But yes, no, I understand what you mean. Just a fabulous Grand Prix once again, wasn't it? Threw up everything that you could ever wish for. Just as a motorsport fan, whether you were there in person, despite the wet weather, I'm sure you had a thoroughly amazing time. And obviously anybody watching at home on TV would have been captivated by that because it literally was action from start to finish.
And the attendance was bang on 500,000 across the entire Grand Prix from Thursday to Sunday. So huge figures once again at Silverstone. But of course, it was Lando Norris who came out victorious, which leads on to the first question from Essie, which Sam, I will direct to you. Why did Lando Norris get 2 trophies on the podium and the other drivers only got 1?
Thank you very much for the question. That is a very good question and well observed.
Attentive.
So, I mean, first of all, you got to spare a thought for Nico Hulkenberg. 239 races, he's pursuing a F1 trophy, and it's made of Lego. But that won't have any kind of. It won't take the shine off any bit for him. But just fairly amusing. The reason why Lando got 2, however, is that the official trophy that is handed out to the winner of the British Grand Prix every year, he doesn't actually get to keep. It is always returned to to Britain's Royal Automobile Club. I knew I was going to struggle to say that, the RAC Club, not to be confused with the Roadside Assistance Company, if you are British-based, which is also called the RAC. But so it's returned to the Royal Automobile Club at the end of the race weekend. So he doesn't actually get to keep it. It is displayed at the RAC instead. So he does get to keep his Lego one, though. But that's why there were 2.
You've got to say that those Lego trophies were absolutely amazing.
Brilliant.
I was there on Friday morning when 2 Lego people did the unveiling, and it was just fascinating press conference that they held. I mean, just a little bit of insight. The second trophy that Lando raised on the podium, which was obviously the Lego one, was made of 2,717 bricks.
Wow.
And weighed 2 kilograms. And was not far off being a pretty damn good replica of the proper British Grand Prix Winners' Trophy. So well done, Lego. Fair play. Great innovation.
I saw someone point out that Lando, having broken a trophy on the podium before, probably wasn't the best person to give a Lego trophy.
In that press conference as well. Yeah. Would anybody drop it and break it? So, but hey, at least you could put it back together, unlike the other one, of course, which would not have been possible.
Well, you can break it apart and build it again. It's the trophy that will never leave your side, unless, though, you're the McLaren drivers and others who are actually contracted to give their trophies to their teams, and they then get replicas. I don't quite know how Lando and Oscar will get replicas of the Lego trophies.
You'll probably be able to buy it soon.
I think they might just be able to keep those ones. I got a feeling that they will. I'll have to check.
I like that, Sam. You can, You can come into a Lego store near you soon. Anyways,
they are one-offs. They are unique.
Oh, that's good to know. Also, we are not sponsored by Lego.
No.
Would be good though. Lego, if you want to sponsor us,
please do.
Let's get him on the phone.
I like Lego quite a lot. Anyways, moving on to the next question, and it comes from Emma, and Ian, this one will come to you. Why did Oscar Piastri get a penalty for braking behind the safety car whilst George Russell did not get a penalty for doing the same thing in Canada?
Yeah, thank you very much. We discussed this quite a bit in our podcast, and if you've not seen that, folks, please do refer back. It was a really good show this week, post-British Grand Prix. Quite simply, on this occasion, Oscar Piastri's braking was deemed to be erratic by the stewards, and we saw Oscar brake from 218 kilometers an hour down to 52 kilometers an hour. The reason why he did so, and there were extenuating circumstances around this, was that the lights on the safety car went out. Now, when they do that, that signifies that the lead driver can get the race underway again. Because Oscar was accelerating at the time, as soon as he saw those lights go out, he didn't want to get the race underway. He wanted to back the pack up a little bit. So that naturally led to this huge deceleration, as I say, quite considerable, nearly around 160 kilometers an hour, that he went from top speed down to the lower speed of the 52. The stewards, however, felt that this was erratic braking. They determined that given the wet weather conditions as well, and you've only got to see Max Verstappen's onboard to appreciate at that particular stage the volume of spray that was coming off Oscar Piastri's McLaren, to recognize that visibility was considerably poorer under the circumstances, that they deemed the braking to be erratic. Of course, it's hugely debatable as to whether the 10 seconds was correct or whether it should have been 5, but nevertheless, there was an offence committed. With regard to George and Max in Canada, we know what that was all about. And yes, there was a bit of braking that took place by George. We did see Max go past marginally at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve behind the safety car on that occasion. Nevertheless, George's braking throughout that phase was relatively consistent, whereas the Oscar one was quite severe. And as I say, I'll use the wording again that was used in the steward's doc, erratic.
And actually, we ran a poll Racing News 365 on whether the penalty was too harsh or not severe enough. And actually, what's interesting is the vast majority of those who voted, in your thousands, by the way, did really big votes, believe that a 5-second penalty would have been the fair punishment handed to Oscar. Thank you very much for your question. Moving on to the next one, and I'll let you two decide who answers this one. It comes from Berry. If the safety car spins or gets damaged, is there a backup safety car?
Thank you very much. That's a really interesting question, because we've actually seen a few instances in the past where we've needed multiple safety cars over a Grand Prix weekend. So to quickly answer the question, there's 2 safety cars that are over a Grand Prix weekend. And we had a couple of incidents last year. So at the Italian Grand Prix, Bert Mailander, who drives the safety car, actually crashed the Aston Martin version on Thursday in a high-speed crash test. So the substitute was used for the rest of the weekend. And then at the Qatar Grand Prix, where it was the Mercedes version, and I'll get onto this in a moment, during the second of 3 safety car periods during the race, there was a technical issue with the lights on top of the safety car that obviously tell drivers if if the safety car is continuing or if it's going to go back into the pits. There was an issue with that. So for the 3rd time that the safety car came out, they swapped it to the alternate. So there were 2 safety cars used in the Qatar Grand Prix in 2024. And as I mentioned, there's an Aston Martin and a Mercedes. They share the honours, the duties for F1. So it's an Aston Martin Vantage and a Mercedes AMG GT Black Series that F1 uses at the moment.
Very well answered. Anyways, moving on to the next question. That's a very cool question. I'm liking these questions today. The next question, I'll fire this over to you, Ian, comes from Tynus, and apologies in advance if I've pronounced any of these names incorrectly. Did Red Bull take too big of a risk with their low downforce setup on Max's car for Silverstone?
It was a risk. And the reason why it was a risk, because the weather forecast across the weekend was going to be quite mixed. It worked out beautifully on Saturday, as we saw. It was effectively, as you say, a Monza-esque downforce rear wing. Reason being is that Monza is the lowest downforce circuit on the calendar. Therefore, you need a very specific wing for that particular race to get the best lap time out of the circuit. Red Bull placed what was effectively a similar version of rear wing on that RB21 for Silverstone qualifying, and having made an additional few changes overnight, bearing in mind the complaints that Max had following Friday or during Friday practice, he delivered what was a phenomenal qualifying lap, as we all saw. The mitigating factor, of course, was would it rain in the Grand Prix on Saturday, because that's when having that rear wing on the car was always going to be more difficult under those conditions. And unfortunately for Max Verstappen and for Red Bull, as we saw, there was plenty of rain pre-race, during the race, and that really, unfortunately for Max, played its part in him being unable to extract the best performance that he possibly could out of that car during the Grand Prix. We saw at one point, of course, he did spin when running in second, dropped down to 10th, but nevertheless, Max being Max, still delivered a superb performance to climb to 5th in the classification by the checkered flag.
For certain. Moving on to the final question, it comes from Jesse, and I can open this one up to the pair of you to fight over who answers the final one. If Max does go to Mercedes next year, would Gianpiero Lambiase, his race engineer, be allowed to go with him as well? Who wants it?
I'll let you take the floor. Off you go, mate.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's a very good question, because theoretically, there's no reason why he wouldn't be able to. And this is a subject that became quite a big talking point before Lewis Hamilton went to Ferrari, and as whether or not Pete Bollington or Bono would also go with him. So with the case of Max and GP Lambiase, there's no reason in theory why he couldn't also make the switch, but it is very much dependent on whether or not he has a contract with Red Bull that runs past the point at which Max hypothetically goes to Mercedes. And if he does, if the team would be willing to buy, Mercedes to buy him out of their contracts and so forth. But there is no real precedent for this happening. So it's very much the case of, what could be arranged under those circumstances as to whether or not GP would go with Max.
Just to add to that, actually, you would assume that Gianpiero does have a contract with Red Bull for next year and beyond, based on the fact that aside from being Max Verstappen's race engineer, he took on a new role at the start of this season as head of racing. So I cannot imagine that Red Bull gave him a contract with that new job title for just this season. As I say, I can imagine it's for at least the next couple of years. So if Max did go to Mercedes for next year, I don't think he'd be able to take Gianpiero with him for next year, because Gianpiero would have that extended contract. That would be my rationale behind that anyway.
Ian, Sam, amazing stuff. As always, a big thank you to Essie, Emma, Berry, Turnus and Jesse. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to everyone, as I said, who sent in your questions. Please do keep doing so, and maybe your question will be getting answered in a video very soon. For myself, Sam and Ian, this has been us answering your fan questions. See you later.
Thanks for watching and listening as always. Take care, folks.
Thanks for joining us.